Joshua Tiemann's one of the Tiemann Borg collectives. Borg were about the only thing out of Next Generation that were kind of cool. They were like, all right, that's, all right. Joshua Tiemann says, what's the most plausible dystopia you've ever read or watched? The most plausible dystopia I've ever read or watched, Joshua, is the Soviet Union. And that's not fiction, and it's not hyperbole, and it's not invention. I was speaking in high school of my college days and being, I still don't consider myself a left-winger. I guess I was, but it just doesn't seem like it compared to what the left is today. In any event, we hear about how awful the Nazis are, but we never hear about how bad the communists were unless you're talking to one of those right-wing nut jobs who is seeing communists everywhere. Well, it turns out you were seeing communists everywhere because they were everywhere. McCarthy, I'm not a fan of McCarthy's tactics, but when McCarthy said there's communists all throughout the State Department, McCarthy was right. And when the left said that, the Rosenbergs were innocent, they weren't innocent. They were guilty. They sold nuclear secrets to the biggest mass murderers in history. And Alger Hiss was, turns out, no. All these charges against the communists were right. Turns out the communists were running the Communist Party from USA, from the Kremlin. So is it that bad? It is. You just cannot imagine that a society could exist on Earth like the Soviet Union. But it did for 70 years. I know I'm going over ground. I cover a little more. I'm going over ground I've talked about a lot recently. But that was Stalin who came in and made it bad. No, it was Lenin. Lenin invented the Cheka. He invented the secret police. Lenin invented the show trials. Lenin sent innocent people to die because he thought it'd be good for the revolution. Lenin is a mass murderer, and Lenin established the state that Stalin took over. I've said it before on the show. I've probably said it 5 times on the show. This is not for the faint-hearted, but if you've got the stomach to find out what people are actually did to each other, not capable of doing in 1984, some piece of fiction set on Planet Tralflamador, no. I mean, I'm talking about like really happened. Go to YouTube and look and watch The Chekist. It's you don't want to watch it with your kids, mostly because of endless, total, nonstop, full frontal nudity of both men and women. Because this guy decided if I put these people in jogging shorts, it's going to take away from the reality of it. And you see The Chekist, and you'll see that for 70 years, in the basement of the Lubyanka, there was a wall. And people would line up naked, 6 at a time, and get shot in the back of the head. Started at sunset, went on till dawn, every day for freaking 70 years. Millions and millions of people just executed. Millions more, 7, 8, 9 million starved to death. The kulaks. Starving to death is not a good way to go, folks. Starved to death in the countryside, and then the millions of people who were sent to the gulags, the millions of them, who never came back, who died out there on the taiga, out on the frozen Russian plains, and all of them thought, communism made a mistake. If only Stalin knew about these camps. Stalin murdered everybody. He murdered everybody. He murdered his former allies when they were no longer useful. He murdered them, and he brought in new people. And when they were no longer useful, they murdered them. If you want to watch just a taste of it, BillWhittle.com, go to the Firewall page and look for The Murderers in the Kremlin. I talk about the five of these secret police guys, Dzerzhinsky, Mazhinsky, Yagoda, Yezhov, Beria, and Putin. The Yezhov, they called him the Blackberry. He's a dwarf. They called him the dwarf, the evil dwarf. He was 5 foot tall. He murdered millions of people. And he seems like he was actually a pretty decent guy when he wasn't murdering millions of people. And so, the communists, the people who support the socialism thing, the communism, they didn't do it right. Oh, really? Well, where did they do it right? Oh, no. Stalin was, he wasn't a communist, wasn't a true communist. He was a Stalinist. Oh, yeah, that's why he murdered people, because he didn't do it right. I see. So communism works in China then, where Mao killed 30 million people, 40 million maybe. No, he didn't do it right either. Oh, okay, so where do we go now? Do we look at Adolf Hitler and National Socialism? Is that how it's done right? No. He was a really awful guy. No, he didn't do it right either. How about Cambodia? Did he do it right in Cambodia with Pol Pot? He killed 7 million people. No, they didn't do it right there either. What about in Cuba? Was it done right in Cuba? Communism, Fidel Castro killed thousands of people, just lined up kids and shot them in the head. How about that? No, he didn't do it right either. Well, honestly, socialists, if it turns out that your track record is 100 million to 200 million people dead, and they can't do it right, then maybe this isn't the best idea of all time. Maybe the idea that putting unlimited power of total power in the hands of a small group of intellectuals determines the fact that the toughest, most murderous bastards are going to find their way to the top and kill everybody. If that's what happens every single time you employ your system, then maybe it's not that they're not doing it right. Maybe they're doing it exactly right. Maybe they're doing it exactly the way it's designed to be done, and that's why it keeps turning out the same. Maybe it's time to stop this idea, Just me. I mean, if I put my hand on a red-hot stove and I burn my hand to the point where I've got permanent scars, and I do it again, 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 it's not like I'm not touching the stove right. I think I'd probably learn that after the second time. I wouldn't touch it a second time because I'm a little smarter than that. But if I did touch it a second time and got burned that badly, that would be enough for me. I wouldn't have to do it 9 times or 15 times or 20 times, and then after 20 times sit there and say, I'm still not touching this thing right. There's got to be a way to touch it right. Maybe you shouldn't be touching a red-hot stove, just a, off the top of my head kind of a thing. So it's the Soviet Union for real, Joshua. It's not a novel, and it's not a fantasy, and it's not some guy's vision of how things could go really wrong. It's what actually happened. The Chekist, Checkist. It's in Russian with English subtitles. It's brutal. And the genius of this guy who made this movie, it's made by a Russian, I want to say it's about 2009. So you start off by watching these people just marching down the stairs into Lubyanka, and the guards pulling them out of this underground cellars, look like wine cellars, and there are people in there praying, and one by one they're called out, and they're taken down the hall, and they're stripped of their clothes, and they're lined up against the wall, they're shot in the back of the head, they're put on a meat cart, and the next 6 people come in, and then those first six people who've just been shot are taken to a board with a hole in the roof. They're in the basement, and there's a rope that comes down like a noose, and they put this noose around their feet and haul the corpses up to the meat wagon. And there they sit, fully naked people, being hauled out like the exterminated cattle that they are. And I thought, man, this guy had a lot of guts to show that. When I'm watching the movie, I thought, that's a pretty powerful scene. And I thought the rest of the movie was going to be like, okay, well, we've got that established. But the genius of that movie was, no, he just spends the whole movie there. So you're watching the movie, and it's like, as these guys are talking and as you're learning about these characters in the background, 6 at a time, and some of the things that these people were saying as they were being led off to be executed were so bizarre that you knew they must have been true. This one little old lady is like walking next to this Chekist who's about to shoot her. She knows she's going to get shot because she saw the 6 people ahead of her get shot. She's standing there, stark naked, walking up against the wall, and she says to this guard, "Will somebody please feed my cats?" And the guy says, "Yes, ma'am, don't worry, we'll take care of it for you. No problem, we'll be sure to take care of that for you." "Oh, okay, well, as long as my cats are going to be okay." And they walk up to the wall. They walk up to the wall. There's a true story about this that I read on a book on Stalin. A guy found a woman in 1996 or something like this. This is 5-6 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he found her, and she had a little carpet bag, and not a little carpet bag, a big carpet bag. And he interviewed her for the book on Stalin. Simon Sebag-Lifari, I think, the Red Tsar, the Court of the Red Tsar, a fantastic book. And Life and Fate by Grossman. In any event, he found this woman, and she had a giant carpet bag full of pictures. And he interviewed her, and she was fairly famous. She was on the inner circle, Stalin's inner circle. So she brings out these pictures. Here's my husband who was murdered by Stalin. Here's my 2 sons who were murdered by Stalin. Here's my father and mother who were murdered by Stalin. Here's this other guy who was murdered by Stalin, and my uncle who was murdered by Stalin, and my 2 brothers who were murdered by Stalin. And she shows him the pictures, and when she's done, she turns to him and says, despite everything, I still believe in communism. And I believe her. I believe that she still believes in communism. Because it was the belief, right? It was the belief. It was the wishing it were true. And of all the things I've ever read in my life that made my blood run cold, it was that woman who's had her entire family exterminated by one individual's decisions. And at the end of it, she goes, I still believe in this great idea that all of my relatives were murdered for. You deserve what you got.